It's game night, and you've just realized that you haven't created anything for the session this evening, despite having had a week to work on it. But don't worry, it happens to the best of us. I'm RJ Kerr, and I'm going to show you how I create an adventure from scratch when I'm on a time crunch. So, the first thing that I do is I gather together some information that's going to be useful to me as I piece this together. Um, if you are already running your campaign, you probably already have an idea of maybe perhaps where this adventure will take place, the party composition, so number of characters, their level, that kind of thing. And so you might have some of this information to work with. But for the sake of this example, I don't have that context, so I built this from scratch. The first thing that I did is I wanted a seed for an idea. So having none come to me within the first 30 seconds of sitting down to work this, I jumped on ChatGPT and I said, please generate for me a list of 100 fantasy locations suitable for a D&D adventure. And it spit out 100 kind of very simplistic, in some ways kind of bland options, but that's really all I needed. I grabbed my D100 and I rolled up, and it came up with the Haunted Moor, which immediately started sparking some ideas for me. Moors are kind of already this kind of creepy, or can be this kind of creepy marshland. They're typically up at higher elevations. They have poor drainage, so they get a lot of stagnant water, which means you get these peat bogs, which function a lot like quicksand. And they also have lots of hills and rocky outcroppings, very few trees. And then, of course, we have the note that it's haunted, telling us that we already know something that's here. So with that in mind, I sat down and determined what level characters and the number of them. So I had my party composition. Again, in this case, I just rolled a dice for that. And so I ended up with 4 second level characters for this adventure. So that's what we're going to scale this to. We're going to balance it for. Then I picked up a copy of the monster manual and I started flipping through, looking for monsters that were in line with the abilities of the characters. We didn't have anything that was too powerful, but nothing was too underpowered. We have a small set of monsters to work with. I came up with a few. The first thing that jumped right out at me was the bullywug, right? So those little frog folk that predate the grongs, right? And that got me thinking about amphibians and reptiles, and I thought it'd be really cool to have kind of a newt folk. So, a sentient species that were based off of newts or salamanders, not elemental salamanders, but like the amphibian. But I didn't really want to do the fire newts out of, say, the Tomb of Annihilation setting, and is because I really didn't want to get into the fire elemental kind of vibe here. I didn't like the feel of that. So I thought I'd do my own quick little homebrew for that. And so I created newt folk, which are really just kobolds with amphibious as one of their traits. And I gave them a swim speed. Not that that'll necessarily come into play here. But, in my mind, that's a kobold stat. And it has amphibious, which means it can submerge itself in the water, perhaps in the peat bogs themselves, and jump out and do ambushes and that kind of thing. But a nice low-level creature. And then, of course, we have the haunted bit here, which means that we need undead. And so, looking through the monster manual, it came with skeleton, shadow, ghoul, and specter as kind of a range of undead potentially applicable to this. I made a list here. I listed their challenge rating next to them, and then I jumped into Xanathar's just real fast and figured out what the player character to monster ratio would be. So for a medium difficulty encounter, I can have 3 of these CR 1/8 newt folk for every character, one player character. 2 bullywugs for every one player character. 1-to-1 for shadows. For every 3 player characters, I can have 1 specter or 1 ghoul, that kind of thing. This is just a very kind of very rough and loose way of conceptualizing the difficulty of encounters here, knowing that I can dial this up by adding a few more. I can dial it down by having the numbers and making a range of difficulty encounters really on the fly. This all took maybe about 10 minutes to do. Did not take a lot of time, but there's no reason to sit here and show you flipping through the monster manual when, you can do that on your own. So I collect all that, and I jot that down into a little box in the corner here so that I don't have to keep going back to source material. I have those in my notes. I have something I can use to build out these encounters as we go. So that means it's time to start brainstorming how all this is going to fit together. Now, when I'm on a time crunch and I need to build something quick, I like to use one of several different proven adventure design strategies. So in this case, we're going to use one that's called the 5+5 model, where we end up with effectively 10 rooms or 10 scenes in this case is how I'm going to think of them. And 5 of those are what we call feature rooms, and so they're encounter spaces, places where the characters have some challenge potentially to overcome, but something they can really interact with and encounter of some kind. And then 5 that are more scenic, that are more thematic. They add atmosphere, maybe put something cool in there for the characters to check out, but that aren't challenges. They're not places where the characters need to figure something out or defeat monsters or that kind of thing. And so I'm just going to be kind of sketching this out on the page here, getting ideas for how these things fit together. Now, one of the advantages to working in a traditional sort of dungeon environment like a cavern or a castle is that you have walls, ways of dividing up these spaces from each other. But we're going to lean into kind of the expansiveness of a moor, and meaning that we're going to create these rooms or scenes, these spaces, and we'll put some detail into what goes into each one of those spaces. But how they connect, we're going to leave that up to a list of thematic elements, meaning that we're not going to worry too much about really sketching out, every trail and path that snakes between them. But we'll note that there are marshy, boggy spaces. There's the potential to fall into these peat bogs, get stuck like quicksand. There's some areas that are rocky, sort of cliff faces that are difficult to climb, sort of making these natural segments. And so we end up with these sort of paths through the bog. And so we kind of end up with this blend of a wilderness environment with a dungeon structure in this. And we'll show you more about how I do that as I go. But first things first, I like to start with where the adventure is going to begin and where it's going to end. So specifically in this, that means that we're going to have our entrances and we're going to have our climactic encounter. So just in terms of kind of sketching this out, I'm going to make these visual spaces, right? So I'm going to say that we have our climactic encounter over here to start, and then our entrances, keep things interesting. I like to have a couple of them, so we're just going to put them at the far ends of the graph paper here. When in doubt, I like to use a 10 by 10 for this, so that each block is 10 feet by 10 feet, because that just gives me a little more room to work with. But you can do 5 by 5. It just depends on how much space you want to take up. So we've got 2 entry points so that the player characters have some choice. And now I want to think of what is that climax going to be. What's that final encounter going to be? What's the purpose of this adventure? What's the goal? And a couple of things jump out at me right away. I think of things like barrows, so like places where there's sort of old Celtic crypts, kind of. Generally built into hills and rocky outcroppings and that kind of thing. It's where we get the term like borrowite, that kind of deal. But I can imagine there being either a haunting that the characters have been told to get rid of, or perhaps a treasure that they're looking for, and that it's all found within that same barrow. And so that's what that space is going to be. It's going to be the interior of sort of a natural crypt built into a hillside up above some of the peat bogs at a slightly higher elevation. So we're going to say that this is probably going to be a fight. All right, we're going to have a combat encounter there, and it's borrow. So just make a couple notes to myself so I know what's there. We're going to finalize this in ink later on, but we're going to start just by kind of piecing how these go together. I'm going to put a couple entrances, like I said, down here. And I just like to do this so that I have an idea of where we start and where we're going to end. And it's just easier, I find, to fill in the middle pieces when you have the two ends of that line, so that you kind of know where your guidelines are, where your barriers are conceptually. And I use that whether I'm developing a plot for an narrative adventure or whether I'm just creating maps like this or something quick and on the fly. So, like I said, we need 5 featured rooms, right? So one of those is a fight. It's great. I also had this idea of this sort of marshy area where the path maybe kind of winds its way through, with a lot of kind of have the peat bogs on either side, and easy to kind of step off. But I imagine an ambush in this place, perhaps by one of our Newt folk tribe or something along those lines. And so, dealing with the trap-like hazard of the terrain along with the ambush makes this a challenge, because it's not so much the characters need to defeat these Newt folk potentially; it's that they need to get through this space, right? And so, however they tackle that is up to them, but that's the objective for this particular area. But I can imagine this being a low channel in the moorlands here, right? That the characters, depending on the route, may be forced to go through. So we got our fight, we got our challenge. Reward and a twist are 2 of the other features of this, this 5+5 dungeon design. And so for me, I like when I think about moors, I think a lot about the Hound of Baskervilles, the Sherlock Holmes story, because there's a big portion of that takes place out on the moors. And in that story, there's a hermitage, there's a cottage, a little hut. I guess I think it's described as a hut in the story, but it's well away from everything else, and it becomes a point of interest throughout the investigation. I won't give you any spoilers in case you want to read it, but I think about those lonely little dwellings out in the middle of nowhere, and so the idea of a hermitage of some kind comes to me. A little space that is perhaps secret, and the characters might discover by hunting around these moors looking for the burrow. And so we're gonna call that our twist. Okay. And that's something that might provide them a boon or a bane, depending on how they deal with the hermit. We'll see. But something they can discover. And then I like the idea of lost or buried treasure. I know that on the surface that sounds a little piratical, but I think about bog mummies when I think about moors. That if you've done any reading in archaeology or Celtic history, they used to put hide bodies into these peat bogs. Some evidence to believe they were human sacrifices, that kind of deal, but they get preserved in there because of the low oxygen content. We find these bog mummies, but I think about other things being kind of lost into these peat bogs, and maybe there's some treasure, maybe there's a reward or some magic items or something like that the characters can find depending on how they choose to navigate this path. And so let's make that area the buried treasure. Okay, in here. All right, so we kind of have a space for that. And that gives us 4 of our featured rooms, which means we need 1 more. Let's put, when in doubt, a fight can be fun. A fight is easy, especially when you're in a push, on a time crunch, right? So we can say another fight And this is a camp of some enemy living out on the moors, maybe hunting for the same thing. Okay, so that gives us our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms. We've got our entrances, which I don't generally count as one of the rooms in this, but I do like to add them on my map here so I know where things are going to start. So we're going to need 5 thematic rooms that give us cool little things the characters can come across, but are more about building the atmosphere of the adventure. And also kind of dividing up the action a little bit, right? If you go from action to action to action, the players are going to get a little bit bored of that. They're going to get used to that pattern of there being something in every room, and they lose the suspense, they lose the surprise of a climactic encounter. So we want to give that a little bit of a break. But we're going to kind of pace these out, wherever they seem like they fit nicely. So I'm just going to give these numbers so we've got a vibe for where they go. There's nothing wrong with doing kind of an alternating pattern on this. We're going to talk about how these link together in a minute here, but just giving yourself some spaces where the characters can breathe and make different decisions. So let's do one there, and maybe let's. There's nothing wrong with. Well, maybe we put it there. We can hold off on some of this until we kind of see how these map together, right? So we have these spaces, and we'll outline them and finalize them, in ink here shortly to give an idea of what those scenes are going to look like. But I also want to see how they connect, right? Because one of the things that we want in this is we want there to be player agency in the terms of navigation, right? So that they can't just say, well, we start here at the entrance and we navigate towards wherever the borrow is, and you go, okay, well, I guess you can just go point A to point B, because that circumvents everything. So instead, in each place where they go, we can give them a description of forks in the road, the things they see there, and they make decisions. Do we go left? Do we go right? Can we tell by doing a survival check, that kind of deal, where we need to go? And you have lines that connect these. But we're just going to use simple lines because we really don't need to draw out, every snaking path that goes through this, because this is, in fact, a much larger area and in the real world than any of these individual spaces would suggest. And they're certainly not this close together. All right, so a good rule of thumb that I use on this is that every room should have a choice of exit, right? So that means that when you come into a space, you come in from one direction and you're gonna leave through one of two others at least, right? So there's always a choice, and that those need to be real choices. They should not be false choices. So for example, in this room here, this entrance here, I like the idea of this, coming down to the to our challenge room here, this low area on the map where we have this trail through the bog, this space of challenge. Now, the other one, makes sense for it to then, arc up. Maybe it comes up along a ridge and it heads over to this scenic area. Now, for this choice to matter here, that means that this scenic path shouldn't snake back down to the beginning over here, right? Because now that's really just one choice being made. It doesn't matter which way they go, they always end up here. It can, however, do things like maybe it comes down part way, it connects with the main path here so that they don't have to get through all of this. Or perhaps it connects over to another scenic space over here, or maybe comes direct to our hermitage. I kind of like the idea of it going to this, you come up on the ridge here. Maybe maybe you can see down here. Maybe you can't, but there's but it's an elevation, and then there's a path that leads over to this other scenic area here, and then there's a path that leads over to what appears to be maybe a hill, because this is our hidden area, right? So this is a place that they have to go find. So maybe it leads to a hill, or maybe it leads through a winding, or it leads over a winding ridge line to another point in the distance. We'll have to decide that, and we'll talk about how we make it easy for ourselves to describe that kind of stuff and give real choices to our characters in a minute here. But let's see how they connect. So I like, we have these two potential spaces here. I like the idea of that maybe ridgeline continuing here to this other scenic, and then it comes up here to our climactic encounter potentially. Then we've got this scenic one here, and I like that. It makes sense for it to connect to our reward, which is our buried treasure, connecting here to our third, over to our fight, which connects to our entrance here. So we've kind of got this simple looping structure here, but now we can branch out and find all the different places that these connect. So let's say, this guy connects here. This could... Well, let's start over here. So, our challenge can connect up to 1 here. Perhaps 5 isn't the best choice right here. Maybe, just because we want something, just because the ideal is to have, 2 choices of pathway, doesn't mean it always has to have that. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it connects all the way over here. Maybe this goes all the way to our 1, and maybe the Hermitage connects. No, I want there to be 2 choices in that one. We'll think about that. Let's think about that. It's potential. We're brainstorming here. We're coming up with pathways and kind of seeing how they go. We want to create loops as we can in here that makes navigation a little more meaningful, but doesn't make it irrelevant. So let's say we could have, we could actually say that these connect, because if this is a lowland, maybe it's kind of a ravine kind of structure here, and now we actually have a bridge, a wooden bridge that goes over these two rocky walls here. So we could have a bridge that spans that space there, connecting these 2 points, giving us that. We could then have this guy here who, let's break this connection. Fight. Let's put maybe our 5th one over here instead. And that connect there. And then this comes here. Now, I realize there's a loop here, but that doesn't invalidate the choice here, right? Because now they have a choice between hitting the fight and going this way and hitting the reward first. So that order makes this significant, because maybe there's something in here that might be useful. Maybe there's not, but we don't know. We get a nice little loop here that you can navigate through. We get a loop that kind of comes up through here. We can say that maybe there's a path that comes up from our challenge over to our Hermitage, leads up that way, so we get another loop. And yeah, let's see. So we've got a couple different places that have multiple options. So it's 1, 2, 3. We don't need as many coming from here because we're kind of ending up there, right? That's the goal. This one has got now multiple options. Got a little elevation in there, which is good. But let's see, that one only has 2, 2. That one. Kind of want there to be something else here. Well, if this fight is between the same kind of creatures as what is here, then it doesn't have to be, but maybe it is. Maybe there's a path, but then that crosses over here. I don't necessarily know that I want that in that space. You know what? I think we can leave it. We've got a couple different routes here that give us lots of navigation points. Well, maybe we put again, that kind of becomes a needless loop there, but we can cross paths at certain places, give crossroads, right? There's nothing wrong with that per se. So maybe we cross over here, and so we have something that loops back, and then this can be a crossroads point, a place where these two paths intersect, and the characters can make a choice. Left or right, straight ahead. What are you going to do? Because that does have some consequence. They follow one route, they'll end up on a different side of the map. They follow another, they'll end up on another there. So this is simple enough, right? We don't need to put a whole lot more into this, other than kind of just drawing out the scenes and the spaces before we start populating this. So I'm gonna just take a felt pen, and I'm gonna give myself just some very simple lines to illustrate what these encounter spaces are looking for me. And so I'm going to start with the ones that make the most sense right out the gate, or the ones that I have the clearest image of. So I think let's start here. This is gonna make our hermitage. We're gonna put a secret there, and then we're gonna say that it's up on, maybe it's up on a hill. We're gonna just give ourselves some very simple elevation lines. So we have this interior space. We know that this comes up on a rise. You can use whatever markers work for you. But this is kind of my personal symbol for a gentle sloping rise that isn't a craggy face. I'll show you that in a minute. But inside I probably have kind of a hearth fire. They've kind of got like maybe an oven. You've got some tables, and a bed of some kind in here. A couple little annotations to myself just to give it a little bit of flavor. Nothing to overcomplicate this too much. So we've got that. This, like we said, I think is probably just a hill. We'll come back to that space. Let's go here first, and let's say that this is more of a ravine-like structure. Let that peter out to whatever. But we're just going to give ourselves a couple squiggly lines here. We don't have to go insane. Again, this map is for you. It's not for your players per se. Just going to give myself a couple little suggestive lines so I know this is a ravine structure here. So when I'm looking at this later, or I'm playing this tonight and I go, what did I mean by that again? I have that detail, but certainly not to the level of detail that I would do if this was going to be, a map that I would share on a virtual tabletop or that I would hand over to my players. If you need a map for a virtual tabletop, for your game tonight, check out the video I did on making maps in Krita. You don't have to put as much detail as I did into that, but it goes pretty quickly, and you can make something that's the same kind of graphic quality without spending a ton of time on it. So put a little bit of that there. I'm gonna go ahead and just draw out this bridge over it, just to give myself the reminder that that's there. I'm just gonna put a couple slats. Yeah. Put some breaks in there. I will usually put dots at the end of my bridge here, just to, conceptually those are the posts to me. But again, this is just for me to understand what's going on here, not worrying too much about it. This is, again, another hill. So we have kind of a loose circle here and those lines. Myself that elevation. Same here. Don't have to always do a circle. You can do some funkier shapes. Point is, don't get too wrapped around the axle about it. Embrace your inner Bob Ross. There's no mistakes, only happy accidents, right? And so we can do that there. Let's not get too far ahead from here. I do want to make sure that there's a path that goes through here. I'm going to use a different thickness marker for this, just because I'm going to be just a little bit anal. But that there is, actually, let's give ourselves that break here, so that maybe we just color that in, so I know that that's where our entrance is. We're just kind of giving ourselves a little bit of a squiggly line with a couple grassy marks in there, to signify that this is kind of overgrown space. And we're going to have this branching space here. Again, you're not worrying too much about the details, just giving yourself what you need to run this. So if you don't need all of this, if you prefer dotted lines or what have you, then by all means, okay? And to remind myself that this is a boggy space, I'm just gonna give myself a couple little cues. Nothing crazy, and I mean, you could always just write bog over here if we wanted, but we're gonna talk about making annotations as we go here in a minute. But so I mean, you can see that again, this is not fine art, but it gives me what I need. It gives me some thematic elements of the space. Might even just remind myself there's a couple paths over here just to give me those. But anyway, so I've got those, a couple details there. Let's see here. Like the idea of maybe this space being, maybe they back up to a cliff face here. As we come up, so we're gonna kind of give ourselves an escarpment. And you can decide whether or not that's easy to climb or not, and then we can have another side that's it's a more gentle grade, just a different hill, some distance apart. They look like they're right next to each other on the map, but we can conceptualize that they're, they could be a quarter mile apart. Who knows? We could talk about some of those distances as we add in the lines here, but we know we've got that there. Let's make this a boggier place. We know we kind of have our two paths, so let's just kind of give ourselves a loose kind of watery shape there, a low spot. And again, come in with our loose lines. Just give ourselves a little bit of information. We go and we play this. Part of the reason I like to do ink over this is that when I'm done, I can go back with this with my eraser and I can just get rid of any extraneous detail I don't need after the ink dries. So we've got that. We know now that I want the climactic encounter to be up on a barrow, which means I imagine it being kind of like a hill on top of a hill in some ways. Very much kind of like what we have for the hermitage here. This might actually look like a barrow from the outside. It might have been a barrow at one point. And so let's give ourselves just a slightly different shape here. And just very organic. Nothing too crazy. Okay. And I might give myself kind of an entrance here, so I know that there's where that space is going to be. But there may be that, we've got an entrance here, but maybe there's another entrance that the players might be able to find. Maybe we've got an old overgrown hole through the top of the roof. Maybe they can search that out and find it and get a leg up. Who knows? We've got that drawn out. Now we just have to get our couple other spaces here. This one we know is kind of coming down. So we just draw our space again here, and we just put our elevation on one side. So we get a little bit of a hill, and then it naturally tapers down. If I need to remind myself that, I might come in with just a couple, natural staircase lines to just suggest that there's that change of elevation there as we work our way down from one area to another. This one, kind of the opposite, right? We've got the just kind of gets higher as we go, build up into some of the mountainous region. I guess not mountainous is right, but more hilly region. And I think this one makes kind of maybe it makes another boggy patch here. And we can, instead of, we can put our trail lines in here again, as we see fit, but we also don't have to make that one as swampy as some of these other places. And then we just have our entrance in here. So again, we just kind of draw these in. You can leave gaps for the various trails out if you would like to. You don't necessarily have to. This one stays kind of elevated, so let's just make it just kind of make it get elevated on the side here. So it's a path up as opposed to a path down. Just kind of put that in. So very loose, very loose. Now we just connect them. And, for that, you can do solid lines. I'm just going to do dashes here, just to kind of give myself a, just suggestions of where these go. How they connect. Just so that I know when the players are making their own choices, what goes where.
Before we carry on, are you looking for fun, exciting adventures that you can drop into your campaign with ease? If so, check out my published adventures. They're the perfect solution when you need a kickstart for your campaign, a quick adventure to get you through tonight's session, or even just a weekend one-shot. Go to rjkerr.com to find all my content. Thanks for listening. Now back to the video.
All right, so I've got the connecting points here. The next thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and start keying these out. Now you can go in and do this a couple ways. You can go in and you can number these and then have a separate page that's a key, especially useful if you're kind of running out of space in these various places. Or you can draw right on the map. And so when we're keying these out, we're just keying out our, we're starting by keying out our featured rooms. And then we're going to add little, one or two little details for each of our smaller thematic spaces here. We're also going to pick some distances that things are between in our various space here. The nice thing about this being a wide wilderness and things being kind of amorphous and how they connect together, we can be kind of fast and loose about that. And if we run out of time, we don't have to do it at all. But I'm just going to go ahead and write this on our map here so we have a one-sheet adventure, effectively, that we can use. So let's go ahead and start with our climax. Let's start with where we end. And so let's go ahead. I like to, instead of just kind of drawing lines, I do like to number these. I don't really know how I want to number these yet. So, you know what? Let's break from tradition. We're just gonna write. We're just gonna say that, in this space, I like the idea of there being a haunting. So let's say Spectre. Okay, and we know we've got 4 characters. This is a 3-to-1, which means that we've got, for a medium encounter, we've got space for 1 more character's worth of creatures here. But I want to make this a hard encounter. I want to make this a little more dangerous since this is our climax. And then that way, that's our tippy top. Everything else will be lesser shades of difficulty. So to do that, I effectively am planning for 1.5 times the party size. So in this case, that means that instead of accounting for 4 characters, I'm saying I have 6 characters, even though there's really only going to be 4, and I use that many monsters. So we're going to have 1 Spectre, and then I think maybe some shadows to go with that. So that means that we can have 3 shadows on top of that. So we're going to say plus 3 shadow. I'm going to say the spec is bound to we're going to say a vase or pottery, and I'm just going to make a note to myself. I'm going to say it's a phylactery-esque. Okay, and so to me, when I run this, that means that I'm going to know that, okay, there's an encounter here where you have a specter and 3 shadows that'll rise up inside here, and that the specter itself can't be destroyed completely without destroying the vase that it's bound to, this piece of pottery that it's bound to, held within here. meaning that until the vase is destroyed, it's going to continue to come back. And if I'm really worried about remembering, how long it's going to be, I might make a note to myself that it's, within an hour or something like that. But I think I'll figure it out with my phylactery note here. Now I've got the secret entrance over here. I'm gonna add an S to that, since actually I'm gonna add a C to that, because it's really more of a concealed entrance, I think, in my mind. The difference being that a secret entrance, somebody's taking great pains to block. A concealed entrance is just kind of covered up. And so in this case, I think of it as kind of being overgrown. And I'm gonna say, let's give this I'm just gonna say a DC 12 find, right? Let's go ahead and get rid of some of these lines, some of these extraneous pencil marks in here. I don't need to get rid of all of them, but just enough that I can read this a little more easily. So real simple, the characters come up on top, they find, go looking for it. DC 12 will allow them to spot it. Great, all I need to know for that space. Coming down here, Hermitage, we're gonna say that's, we're gonna say DC 15 to find that one. Secret entrance, and we've kind of got the hermit space drawn out there, but we're gonna say, we're gonna say a bullywug hermit. And we're gonna say that he knows secret of spell phylactery. That's not uncommon for me. Phylactery. Cool. And we're gonna say, we're gonna make that a you know what? We don't need to put a DC on that. If the characters find him, they have a social encounter with him, tell them what they want, he might give them that information. I can decide that in game, depending on how they behave with him. I don't need to set a DC for that. But he's in there, and so I've given him, effectively a stat block. I might give him a name if I'm thinking about it. We're gonna call him. Call him Grogwin. Cool. All right, so I've given him a name. I've got a stat block for him. I've got some interesting bit of information that he knows. And since it's kind of a role-play encounter here, I don't need too much other detail than that, along with the DC. So let's go here. We're gonna say hidden treasure, and here I do want to mark where that is on the map. So I'm gonna use a thicker line for that. We're just gonna say that it's just gonna put a block X there. I'm gonna say that's another. I'm gonna say that's a DC. Oh, let's make that really hard. Let's make it an 18. Okay, because it's kind of mostly sunk down into the bog. And for the treasure, let's say that is a. I'm gonna say it's a scabbard. Dead. +1 sword. Cool. So it's not like a treasure chest, but it's somebody's +1 sword that in its scabbard that's been lost into the bog. Okay, the fight here, that should be a that should either be an easy or a medium encounter. I think we're gonna make it a medium encounter. Because I think that an area like this also benefits from random encounters, especially since how spread out we're going to have this conceptually. So here we're going to say, we'll say camp of, yeah, let's say, we want to say it's kind of already got a bullywug over here. There's something to be said for keeping the kinds of monsters you have in an adventure limited, right? So, one, you learn how to play them, but two, you don't need to overcomplicate things. The characters learn tricks and tactics for dealing with particular kinds of monsters, and then you can reward that by having them be more successful when they encounter those monsters later. So that being said, so let's say it's camp of let's say bullywugs. Okay. We could say the newt folk, but yeah, I think I'm gonna make them a wandering monster in here. We're gonna say it's they're a camp of bullywugs, and so that's 2 to 1 medium encounter. So we've got force. We're gonna say 8. I'm gonna say times 8, and we're gonna say they are. I was going to say they're frightened because I like that word better, but it's a mechanical definition, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to say they're scared. And that's gonna make them hostile, right? So maybe they're moving through this land and they're creeped out by it, and so they're going to start off hostile, but maybe some quick thinking, and our characters can get through this without a fight potentially. Who knows? We're going to give that little dynamic element in there. And it also suggests something that this group wants. They want safety, right? So that gives a success criteria for them. So that means that if they drive off the characters, like the player characters run away, they're not going to pursue. So I've just given myself that nice little cue there of something that they want. They don't want to be scared anymore. They want that safety because they are currently frightened. Okay, so that gives me that. And now we've got our challenge to build out here. I'm going to put the notes for that down here because it's going to take up some more space. So we're going to say, I like, there's the idea of the amphibians kind of coming out of the bog and attacking, but I like the idea of this being a haunted more, meaning that like there's undead here that are a threat to everyone. And so I think we're going to go with the skeletons for that, because they can just, pull themselves out of the mire and attack from the bog itself. So it's the same kind of set here. So we're going to say skeletons. So times 8 group there. They are hostile. And then we've got the bog. We're going to say, that's a DC 10 plus feet sunk. And I'm pulling that out of, remembered sections of the quicksand rules in Believe the Dungeon Master's Guide. But effectively, like, you step into a bog and you immediately sink, I think it's 1d4 plus 1 feet, or into a quicksand, I'm sorry, you sink 1d4 plus 1 feet, and then every round you sink deeper, and then you have to make this check to pull yourself out as long as you're the surface. So bog is the DC's 10 plus the feet sunk, and so we're going to say 1d4, and we're going to say sink. We're going to say, I think we're going to say step in on 1, and then conditional. I'll just put my little arrow point here. We're going to say sink, keep this easy on ourselves, 1d4 feet, and restrained Cool. And so there's a chance that as the characters are kind of fighting through this, if they step out of the trail, the designated trail out into the marshy area here, there's a chance that they'll sink. Not a guarantee, because maybe it's pocked. We could say the skeletons are immune. I don't want to say the skeletons are immune. I think that let's say the skeletons make check with advantage. Skeletons. We're gonna say in this case that'd be 2d4. And it needs double ones. And maybe that's to account for the fact that they know where most of these little divots are, these little pockets that they can fall into. And that gives us some variability there. Cool. So that's going to give us all of our playable space here. And now we can put in some cool little thematic elements here. Like, so for example, let's say that there's some standing stones here. Okay, and we'll just make a little note to ourselves in the, graphically we'll put a couple standing stones here. And, we can decide in game if they have any real value or what. But they're here. They're a thing that we can use them as a landmark. So as the characters are navigating, we can talk about, oh, hey, you come up onto the top of the hill and you find 3 standing stones. And then later on, when they're trying to figure out where they're going to go next, they're from the Hermitage, for example, we can say, oh, you can head towards a large humped mountain in the distance, or there's another, a hill down to the south that appears to have a number of stones standing along the top. And maybe that's interesting in our adventure here. Maybe it's just useful landmarks. Either way, it adds a little flavor, a little bit of color. And so we're just going to put little things like that here. So let's, for example, we'll put a burnt out, fire here, and we'll say that this one is an old camp with 1 dead bullywug. Cool. The nice thing too about using bullywugs everywhere, for example, in here, and then mixing in with the undead, is that depending on what order the characters encounter these bullywugs, it will determine their initial reaction to them, right? So if they come into the fight first, they're going to think bullywugs are all enemies. Or as we have an allied bullywug over here, they come this way, they're going to think vice versa. So it'll change their tactics and their experience of the adventure. So let's say that there is, let's put an old well. There doesn't have to be anything in the well. Maybe there is. Maybe we decide that there's something in the well. But we're just gonna draw that in. Circle and dot. Great. Okay. And what do we want to put here? So that kind of climbs up to a ridge line. Hey, you know what? There aren't a lot of trees here, so let's put a lightning struck tree here. Let's do that. So we're just gonna give the Get the roots. Branches up, and just a simple tree structure. Cool. I'm gonna say lightning struck tree. Again, cool little navigation point that gives us a frame of reference, gives the characters a frame of reference, and adds some flavor to this, making even the quote-unquote empty spaces not feel so empty. Then we can come up with the distances in between things, and then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to come up with kind of this this thematic notes section here, just kind of bullet points that affect the whole adventure in terms of what the characters might encounter. I guess it's not quite the last thing we'll do. It's the second to last thing we'll do. Okay, so let's say that we want to put these in terms of whatever's a usable distance for us, right? So let's say that we don't have to have a whole lot of things that cross or over here, but so we need to have some things that are relative to each other, but they don't have to be a whole heck of a lot. But so, for example, these two are relatively close to each other on our map here. And so they kind of form a triangle with this. I don't know, we have to worry about that too much. So let's say that, okay, let's say that this is, say 500 feet. Is that trail there. We're going to say that this one is, I'm going to separate this up into two segments. So we're going to say it's 400 feet and 300 feet. And some of this can be relatively arbitrary, and then we can say that this here is going to be 200 feet. Yeah, so these are all kind of close to each other. Maybe we want to go, you know what? Maybe we want to go a little farther than that. Let's expand this. Let's say that's 1,200, that's 1,400, that's 1,500, 1,300, right? Give this, again, a much wider, larger feel. Let's say that this is, 1,000 feet. This one is going to be, say, 2,000 feet. So again, these don't have to be relative to the distance between lines here. This is just this is a point crawl for all effects and purposes here, right? Or intents and purposes here. So let's say that, let's give this one as 5,000 feet. So effectively, close to 1 mile, and maybe that's a better term that we use for that. That might have been better on this, is to do this in units of a mile, but no big deal. And so we'll say that this one is, we'll give it 3,000 feet. We'll say, let's do another, do 2.5. I'm not gonna lie with you, I'm being pretty arbitrary about this, and there's nothing wrong about that. You just, these are really here so we can offer that travel narration. So as the characters are adventuring, they have this sense of covering a great distance. Let's say that this one is 1,000 feet. We'll say 2,000. And say 35. Say, let's do another 4,000. Let's make this one relatively short. Let's say that that's 500 feet. This one is 1,500. that should be 2,000, not 200. No, orders of magnitude here, but okay, and we'll say that was another 1,500. Why not? Cool. So that gives us the notes that we need for that. Sorry about the gap. My camera died. What we missed was this theme notes section here, where effectively what I've done is I've just made little sensory detail kind of notes for myself here to help with my narration between different areas and routes throughout our map here. So things like, there's a perpetual fog, low sun, meaning it's in dim light, partially obscured in areas. The grass is scrub grass, there's a gray color to it. There's dark marsh soil and the smell of earthy and rotten eggs. That the whole place is covered in kind of a deathly quiet. Very few signs of life, very few trees, and then rolling hills and rocky escarpments. All things that I can use to help set the scene as we transition from place to place. Because for this to be effective, I'm going to have to narrate each of these little routes, these little dotted areas here, letting the characters experience what's in between these disparate points. To that end, there's one last thing that we're going to want to do before we run this, and that is we want a random encounters table. Because this is sort of a wide swath of wilderness, we've effectively made sort of a point crawl here. Random encounters are something that should occur to add some flavor to this habitat. So now for that, we've already done a lot of the work because we have this quick reference table here about of all nicely calibrated creatures. But we also may want to add a couple things to that. For example, we might want to add the peat bog quicksand kind of thing in there as well. And we've got, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. Okay, we can make that a little easier on ourselves if we add one more item to that. So let's go ahead and do our random encounters here. So random counter. And say, ooh, check. Let's see, check each route. And we'll say 1d8 and encounter on 1. That means that about 12.5% of the time we're going to end up with an encounter. And so we'll go ahead and put that table in here now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 things here. 7, 8. Okay. So let's say we want, here we're going to say peat bog. And it's going to be our, actually, what we'll do is we're just going to star that, and we're going to put a star right here so that we know that those two things are referenced. Since just for ourselves, we don't need to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff. I just know that we have that kind of encounter with that kind of rules when we roll an 8 after checking for an encounter. So then working from our top, let's go ahead and we'll do our newt folk here. Let's see here. We've got a 1-to-3 ratio. We want encounters on our random encounters table here to be relatively light. That way, if there's a bunch of them, they're not going to, we don't end up in a situation where it's, hard encounter, deadly encounter, hard encounter. So we're going to want those to be a little easier than medium, maybe a little harder than easy, although some easy encounters in there is not a big deal. So that means that with 4, we don't want any more than 12 of these. So why don't we say, let's say 1d8, we'll say plus 4, and that way we always make sure we have more than one, we have more than a handful of them, but we've got less than 12, so we're not going to have anything more than a medium strength encounter there. So next, same kind of deal with the bully Wogs. Okay, that means less than 8, so let's say 1d6 plus 2. Skeletons will be the same deal. Okay. Shadows. So for shadows, since it's a 1-to-1, if we want to make it easy, we'd have this effectively. So so in this case, we'd say at most we'd want 2 shadows. So we can probably just go ahead and just make that 2 of them as opposed to adding a variable element there. For our ghoul, I'm just going to say 1, and specter, say 1 as well. Then we've got an empty space here. For that, I like to put sometimes things that are boons on a random encounter. You don't always want it to be things that are perhaps combat encounters, although certainly any of these could turn into a boon with the right role play. For example, if they've been befriending the bullywug tribes, it doesn't mean just because they encounter a bullywug, it's a hostile group of bullywugs. Same thing with the newt folk. The skeletons they encounter might be more confused as opposed to hostile. They might not really understand their new status as undead. So there's different ways that we can play this, and that'll be up to us when we run it to make that happen. But sometimes it's fun to put in something that's just gonna be, it's just gonna be a little gifty thing. So let's put a cache in here. Hidden cache, and we'll say that's gonna be. Let's say 1d10 times 10 GP. It's getting a little close there, so differentiate that with a dividing line for ourselves there. But yeah, so that way, if we roll that 7, characters maybe they find a hidden cache and there's gold hidden in there. We might fill it with other things, whatever fits the moment. Maybe healing potions, maybe it's art, maybe it's weapons, maybe it's old scrolls, that kind of deal. Put anything we want, and it's really up to us as we run the adventure to populate it if it happens. But that little 1d10 times 10 gold piece gives us a jumping off point if you hit that moment and you just kind of draw on a blank. But with that, we have a fully runnable, down and dirty, nice quick adventure. We're ready to play a full session at our game night tonight, at our session. Having these effectively 10 rooms, if you will, the 5 featured in the 5 thematic, that fills up on average, depending on your group, maybe about 4 hours of gameplay. So this is plenty. My groups frequently will play for 2 hours at a time, so this might even be 2 nights worth of stuff. And we knocked it out in just over an hour. So anyway, that's all there is to it. Thank you so much for sticking around with me. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like, a comment, subscribe, and be sure to hit that bell icon so that you never miss a video.